All right. So, returning, I left with the discussion of the hermits and the pilgrims, the Cenobites, and the recluse. Besides the erection of monasteries, the princes and nobles of these times displayed their zeal for religion. In the profusion of presents which they lavished on their inhabitants, and in the numerous and important exemptions which they granted them. Each abbey had its treasury, which monarchs and their opulent subjects were studious to stock, with precious effects of various kinds. These generally consisted of rich girdles, magnificent belts, valuable vases, clothes embroidered with gold and stones, and articles of furniture more rare than useful. The monks made a point of preserving such gifts, as well for the glory of the convent as for the honor of the donors. But they were still more careful to preserve those charters which contained the enumeration of their privileges. And sometimes, indeed, they had the temerity to amplify them of their privileges. The French kings exempted them from all taxes on land, houses, and goods, and from all contributions to the support of the judges. A species of import was then in use. Impost, I believe. But even these precautions were inadequate to secure to them the full possession of their property, since the bishops were empowered to dispose of all offerings made at the different churches. All offerings made at the different churches in their diocese. They exacted so much for the benediction of the holy chrism, so much for the consecration of altars, so much for their vitrifications, and sometimes they even insisted on being paid for ordination. Actually, it was not vitrifications, that's something that happens later. Visitations. That's a big difference. But yes, they probably hadn't money for that as well, put aside. The French monarchs persuaded them to give up these rights in favor of such monasteries as were royal foundations, and the prelates engaged never to enter them but when authority of the abbot should prove insufficient to command respect and to enforce obedience. It was always the bishop of the diocese, assisted by the other prelates of the province, who granted this kind of exemption. The first and most ancient is that which was according to the Abbey of Saint-Croix and Saint-Vincent by Germanus, or Saint-Germain, whose name it now bears. It was from such an example that Saint-Denis, Corbie-Lerine, Luxeuil, Saint-Maurice-en-Chablais, and Saint-Vandrille were exempted from the jurisdiction of the ordinary, the hierarchy having employed its authority for its own destruction. It's okay. Anyway, I don't understand that sentence, but yeah, the hierarchy having employed its authority for its own destruction. All right, so the bosses say they're the ones who make that decision. Pope Deodat acknowledges that these exemptions were real abuses. Yet in the same bull in which he says they are contrary to the sacred canons. He confirms all the privileges of Saint Martin at Tours, if that can properly be called a privilege, which annihilates all monastic perfection, which consists in humility and obedience. Although monastic institutions are indisputably liable to various objections of great weight and magnitude, it is certain that France has derived many advantages from the number of its religious establishments. They tended, at least in the early times of this monarchy, to the advancement of religion, and promoted the diffusion of virtuous sentiments. They furnished historians who preserve the annals of the nation, and who, with a proper allowance for their credulity and professional prejudice, may still be read with advantage. And they supplied the state with useful citizens, to whose industry France is chiefly indebted for the present fertility of its soil. The frequent incursions of the barbarians had laid the whole country waste. Nothing but uncultivated plains, extensive forests, barren heaths, and noxious marshes were to be seen in every district. Possessions thus sterile, it was justly thought, might be ceded to the monks without any detriment to the state. Under this idea, as many lands were granted them as they were able to cultivate. Though they had embraced a life of penitence and consecrated themselves to their Creator, they did not they did not wish to encourage sloth or to subsist in idleness, which is really a lot of our time now, the idleness of entertainments. They cleared the woods, drained the marshes, ploughed, sowed, and planted the lands. And planted the lands, and made such erections on them as were necessary for the purposes of agriculture. Nor was their labour polluted by motives of selfishness. They observed the strictest frugality, and the greatest part of the produce of their toil was devoted to the relief and comfort of the poor. Under such auspices, the face of the country was speedily changed. It assumed an aspect of cheerfulness, to which it had long been a stranger. The dark heath now wore an appearance of verdure. The gloomy forest was converted into pleasing plains, and all was cultivation and fertility around. There were some abbeys whose revenues, thus improved by industry, became so extensive that they could raise small armies. Whence it was that the abbots were, in after times, invited to the assemblies in the field of Mars. The custom that so generally prevails at present of making vows in favour of people who sneeze is commonly believed to have originated during the regency of Brunehaut and the pontificate of Gregory the Great. It is pretended that at this period there was an malignity in the air, so contagious in its nature that whoever was unfortunate enough to sneeze expired on the spot, which induced Gregory to order all good Christians to offer up prayers, accompanied by vows, for the purpose of averting these evil effects. But this is a fiction, framed in violation of all the rules of probability, since it is certain that the custom subsisted in every part of the globe from the remotest antiquity. In the heaven mythology, we are told that the first sign of life given by the man of Prometheus was a sneeze. That pretended creator stole a portion of the sun's rays, which having enclosed in a vial, hermetically sealed, he immediately returned to his favourite work, and applied it to the statue. The solar rays had retained all their activity, and insinuating themselves into the pores, made the statue sneeze. Prometheus, delighted with the success of his plan, offered up prayers for the preservation of this singular being. His pupil, hearing him, recollected what he said, and was always careful, on similar occasions, to make the same vows in favour of his descendants, who have transmitted them from generation to generation. The rabbi, in speaking of this custom, do not give it quite so early a date. They say that after the creation, God made a general law by which it was ordained that every living man should sneeze but once, and that at that very moment he sneezed, he should resign his soul to the Lord, without any previous indisposition. Jacob, by no means pleased with this abrupt method of quitting the world, and being desirous of settling his affairs previous to his departure, humbled himself before the Lord, and urgently requested the favour of being accepted from the general rule. He obtained his wish. He sneezed and did not die. All the princes of the earth, being informed of the fact, unanimously ordained that in future every person who sneezed should offer up prayers for the preservation and prolongation of his life. Even from these fictions, it is apparent that this mark of politeness, which is now universally obtained on the continent, was in use long before establishment of Christianity. It was considered as very ancient in the time of Aristotle, who was ignorant of its origin and sought the cause of it in his problems. He pretends that the first men, being strongly prejudiced in favour of the head, which is the principal feat of the soul, that intelligent substance which governs and animates the whole mass, extended their respect to the act of sneezing, which is one of the most manifest and expressive operations. Hence the different complements used on such occasions by the Greeks and Romans, such as long may you live, good health to you, Jupiter preserve you. So we're going back to Aristotle as maybe the earliest one, aside from Prometheus in mythology. So now we have Clotaire II, and he is really sole king of the French. 613 AD. Clotaire was the second of his name, and what is extraordinary, he was the second king of Soissons, who reunited the different parts of the French monarchy, which had been constantly divided since the death of Clovis. But his power was not equal was not equal to the extent of his domination. Could it indeed be expected that a throne raised on a basis of so criminal, would be solid and durable, or that an all just and all sapient providence would suffer so many crimes to pass unpunished? Though Clotaire appeared to have laid a foundation for the greatness and elevation of his family, he was the first cause of its abasement, of its defoliation and desolation, nay, of its total ruin. Garnier, mayor of the Palace of Burgundy, had only declared against Brunehaut on a promise of being confirmed in his office for the remainder of his life. Radeau, the mayor of the Palace of Austrasia, had espoused the cause of Clotaire on the same conditions. Both of them governed in their respective departments more like kings than ministers. Gondilan, mayor of the Palace of Neustria, had also rendered great services to the king. His reward was consequently the same, and his power almost as absolute. The weak monarch consented to grant these important places for life, which originally were holden only during pleasure. The mayors soon began to make all ill use of their authority, which daily continued to increase. While that of the southern diminished in proportion, till at length the descendants of Clovis were dethroned by the posterity of those very men who had favoured their usurpation. Sorry, I just ate cranberries. Maybe they've done something to me. Usurpation over the family of Théry. This Pasquier calls a vengeance truly divine. The mayors of the palace were not the only objects of apprehension to the French monarch. The Austrasian and Burgundian nobles had equally favoured the invasion, and they imagined that the least reward that was due to their services was a permission to commit all acts of violence with impunity. Okay, sorry, I lost it. The king had appointed Duke Herpin to the government of one part of Burgundy, an office which, though one of the most important in the French Empire, had recently been filled by a woman, a thing hitherto unexampled in France. But that woman, it must be observed, was Theudilana, sister to King Théry, so that it was not astonishing that custom should have been made to yield to fraternal affection. This princess was involved in the misfortunes of her family, being arrested with the Queen Brunehaut and brought to the victorious Clotaire. But what became of her afterwards is not known. All that we learn from history is that Duke Herpine was appointed to succeed her. At least, that is what we must conjecture from the account of Fredegarius. After saying that, Theudilana was brought from Burgundy. Whether Brunehaut had fled for shelter, doubtless, because she imagined that a country governed by her daughter must prove a safe asylum for her. He adds that Duke Herpine succeeded Theudilana in a government of that same province. This, however, is but a simple historical conjecture, which we may either admit with Father Daniel on a supposition that the text is correct, or else reject it with some learned critics who read Endilana instead of Theodilana. Herpine was a man of great severity, but rigid in the enforcement of order and justice. He undertook to repress the licentiousness of the nobles, who desolated the province by their oppressive exactions. But enraged at his conduct, they revolted, and the Duke was massacred. So there's a name snafu there with Theodilana being Endilana in one text and Theodilana in another. So, yeah, they're quite similar, because I have not come across many Dilanas at all. So, anyway, the king was then with his whole court at Marlem, a royal mansion in Alsace. He sent a body of troops against the rebels, who quelled the sedition and returned with some of the chief conspirators, who were first tortured and then put to death. Alathius, who had conducted the plot from beginning to end, not only escaped suspicion, but by his artful intrigues obtained that government which had become vacant by the death of a man he had assassinated. This important post revived all his ambition. He was a nobleman of high birth, and was endued with sense, and possessed of courage. He even claimed descent from the ancient kings of Burgundy. Claimed descent. Not decent, he claimed descent. And determined to ascend the throne of his pretended ancestors. The project was rash in the extreme, but still he found means to persuade Laudimond, Bishop of Sion, that it must... Here it comes. It's a page switch, even with a picture here. I've got an image, some kind of a illustration. The Bishop of Sion, that it must infallibly be attended with success. All right, this is the interview of Laudimond, Bishop of Sion, with Queen Bertrude. And I can turn my imager on again. Where is it? I will try. And you can, I'll lift the photo for all, since this is such a rare book. And the pictures are few and far between. Oh my gosh, I'm afraid to lift it now. There goes, the board is already there. So here we are. There's the Ucha. There they two are. There's this one. Oh crud. See, I've been eating cranberry. Oh my gosh, they stain the teeth. Okay, so some sort of a lithography of, I don't know. All right, enough of me. Oh no, I don't have to do it that way actually. I'll just turn it off here. Yeah. All right. Okay, so there they are. That is, well, I'll say it up again. Interview of Ludimond, Bishop of Sion, with Queen Bertrude. She's actually not bad looking, and he is, I don't know, he's okay, but he doesn't have shoes on, and does she? Oh, I can't tell with that dress. Yeah, he has some kind of odd sandal that just goes right underneath the arches. All right, so here we are. It ended with success. No, and yes, she has a nice necklace on with a teardrop jewel. The prelate undertook to make a proposal to Queen Bertrude, the most insolent that ever was made by a subject in his sovereign, to his sovereign. He went to her palace and told her in confidence that it had been revealed to him that the king, her husband, would die within the year. He next advised her to put all her treaties in a place of safety, and offered his own episcopal city for that purpose, and then offered her the hand of Alethius, and the crown which that presumptuous rebel had dared to regard as due to his merit and his birth. Bertrude was naturally simple, and a prophecy thus circumstantial and related by such a person alarmed her affection for Clotaire. Being prevented by excess of grief from entering into an explanation on the temerity of Alethius, she hastily withdrew and retired to her apartment to give vent to her tears. The prelate, disconcerted by the reception which his offers experienced, immediately perceived the whole extent of his imprudence and the consequent danger of his situation. Believing his destruction to the inevitable, he fled to Sion, but his fear proving too powerful to suffer him to remain there, he left it to throw himself under the protection of Eustachius, abbot of Luxiel, who afterwards procured his pardon. In the meantime, the king, informed by the queen of Alethius' conspiracy against his life, instantly dispatched orders to apprehend him. He was tried by an assembly of nobles at Maffloch, a royal feat in Burgundy, and condemned to lose his head. So it didn't go well. These assemblies were often holden by Clotaire. They were called placita, and were a species of ambulatory parliament, composed of bishops, chief officers of the crown, dukes, counts, and sarons, who have since been denominated barons. Sarons. Denominated barons. That which the French assembled this same year at Bonneuil upon the Marne was one of the most numerous that had been hitherto seen. But all the Burgundian prelates and nobles were present. The prince placed but little reliance on their fidelity, and therefore granted them all they required. These assemblies generally met at one of the royal seats. The predecessors of Clotaire only convened them once a year, in the month of March. They were abolished by the mayors of the palace and re-established by Pépin the Fat, but for a long time they were only holden twice a year. It must not be supposed, however, that the administration of justice was neglected. Each state and each possession had its peculiar tribunal, its laws and its customs. Ecclesiastics were tried by the clergy, the military by officers, the nobles by gentlemen, and the people by centurions, in the boroughs and villages, by counts in the cities, and dukes in the capitals. There was no superiority of jurisdiction among these different tribunals, from whose sentences an appeal could only lay to the king himself. If the appeal proved to be well-founded, the judge became responsible for costs and damages. If, on the contrary, the sentence complained of appeared to be just, the appellant, if noble, was condemned to pay a pecuniary fine, and if not, to be whipped. Pecuniary fines were almost the only punishments known in those days, and there was scarcely any other crimes than those which affected the state that were punished with death. The Salic law fixes the sums to be paid by the king, to the king, by way of fine, and to the party injured by way of reparation. The life of a bishop was valued at 900 sols of gold, that of a priest at 600, and that of a laïc at something less, according to his quality. The centurion did not possess the power of condemning criminals to die. The counts themselves only possessed it in certain cases, and the dukes were extremely cautious how they exerted that power. The court sent commissaries from time to time to the provinces, never less than 2, and always one duke. One duke, one count or prelate. Their business was to hear complaints and report them to the king. Lawyers were unknown during the first race of kings. The judges, that is, such were not ecclesiastics, administered justice armed with a sword, a battle-axe, and a shield. Their commission, which was but for a time interdicted them from making any purchase within their jurisdiction. To discharge the office of a judge with propriety, a deep knowledge of the national laws and local customs was essentially requisite. The Frank was tried by Salic law. The Gaul, who resided beyond the Loire, but the custom of the he resided beyond the Loire by the Roman law, and the inhabitants of the northern provinces by the common law or custom of the country. It was definitely all written out, wasn't it? assizes were held every week or fortnight, according to the number of causes, and always in some public place that was open to everyone. Each person pleaded his own cause. Widows and paupers were privileged. They were under the protection of the church, and nothing could be decided against them until the bishop had been apprised of it. The prelates were holden in such consideration in those days that their intercession sufficed to save the life of a criminal, and they could even order a cause to be brought before them, which had begun in a secular court. This privilege was granted them by a law of Constantine. Charlemagne renewed it, and Louis the Debonair, or Gentle, confirmed it. The bishop could decide either in person or by his official on everything that could be considered as a sin, on bargains ratified by oaths, on marriages, wills, sacrilege, perjury, and adultery. This enormous power was founded on the dignity of their character, the sanctity of their lives, and the extent of their capacities. Most of the nobles, neither it's like me here. Most of the nobles neither read nor write till that's how I'm feeling right now. It's actually quite small font. Till tiered at length with being subjected, like the common people, to the correction of priests, they began to study the law. Okay, till tired at length. All right, so most of the nobles did not read or write. Sometimes the monarch administered justice himself. The court was then holden at the gate of his palace. When he could not attend in person, he appointed 2 officers to receive petitions and to give an immediate answer to such as did not require much consideration. Besides these matters of request, there was a count judge, whose councillors were military men like himself, and were called aldermen of the palace. This tribunal decided on matters of the state, and all questions by which the prince or the public was affected. When the king presided, assisted by his prelates, abbots, and dukes, the cause was reported to him by the count judge. His Majesty then cast up the votes and pronounced sentence. The form observed in this case may be seen in the second book of Marculfus. Marculfus will say it. There's a second book, and there's the whole instructions there on how to be a judge in the street with a what was he having? Some kind of weapon. He definitely had a weapon in his hand. Right, okay, we're instead of the gavel. Some time before the Parliament of Bonneuil assembled, a council had been holden at Paris, composed of 79 bishops, many of the nobles, and a great number of the king's vassals, who were called leudes or fidèles. This was the first council of that kind, but many such were assembled under Charlemagne and his successors. It was there that those celebrated ordinances were framed, which were denominated capitularies, from their having been composed in an assembly, or according to the language of those times in a general chapter of the nation. This council, the fourth holden at Paris after the establishment of the monarchy, declares all such ecclesiastical elections as were either simoniacal, which means give, all of that, selling off parts of the church or whatever, or made without the consent of the metropolitan, to be null and void. The third canon prohibits the clergy of whatever rank from employing the credit of the great, or the authority of the king, to the prejudice of their bishop. By the fourth, it is decreed that no secular judge could condemn or punish an ecclesiastic without the knowledge of his prelate. All nuns who should quit the monastic life were declared to be excommunicated, and the prohibition of incestuous marriage was renewed. The king caused an edict to be published by which he confirmed the statutes of the councils, with such additions as he thought necessary to preserve the prerogatives of the crown. All right. In this edict, it was declared that a prelate, when elected after the forms prescribed by the fathers of the council, could only be consecrated by virtue of an order from the sovereign, that every ecclesiastic who should appear to the king for whatever cause should be pardoned on presenting himself to the bishop, with a letter under the royal signet, and that no ecclesiastic should be subject to a secular jurisdiction, except in criminal cases, when the prelates and secular judges should have joint cognizance of the matter. Clotaire, by the same edict, declared it a capital crime forcibly to carry off widows or virgins consecrated to God, whether they resided at home or, oh my gosh, they're carrying off virgins now, watch out, widows at home or in, oh my gosh, in what? Oh, in monastery, at home or in monastery. Okay. He finally abolished all new taxes and revived those which had been in use under Gontram, Chilperic, and Sigebert. There is not any of the ancient edicts in which all the necessary forms are observed with such strictness and precision as in this. It is signed by the king and undersigned by the chancellor or referendary. It was beneath these wholesome regulations that Clotaire attempted to veil the injustice of his usurpation. But though the diminution of imposts secured the applause of the people in Austrasia and Burgundy, his spirit to reform was by no means agreeable to the inclinations of the great, who had only betrayed the family of their sovereign from the hope of living in a state of perfect independence. It is not known whether Garnier really incurred the displeasure of Clotaire by the commission of some treasonable act, or whether he was only induced by the fears which a knowledge of his vicious disposition might naturally excite, to adopt measures for depriving him of his office. Be that as it may, we are assured by an ancient author that the king only assembled the Parliament of Bonneuil for the purpose of persuading the Burgundian nobles to consent to his disposition. So they're all checking up on him. The attempt, however, proved unsuccessful, for they all entreated him to pardon the minister and confirm him in his place. His authority was so feebly secured that he durst not refuse their request, and what happened the following year sufficiently proves that the power of the mayor was greater than that of the monarch. All right, 618 AD. The Lombards, as a mark of their subjection to the Gallic crown, paid an annual tribute to the French of 12,000 foals of gold. Souls of gold, I believe. Adéold, their king, now dispatched an embassy to Clotaire, not only to request the remission of that tribute, but the restoration also of Assos and Susa. We'll say Susa, two places which had been conquered by Gontran. These were posts of great importance, as they opened a free passage for the French troops into Italy, and formed the sole defence of the kingdom of Burgundy on that side. The proposal consequently deserved to be treated with contempt, and to experience a refusal the most prompt and decisive. But the council were of a different opinion. Garnier and 2 other noblemen of Burgundy had received 2 considerable bribes from the king of Lombardy, and they accordingly exerted themselves with such art, industry, and success that the weak monarch of France was prevailed on to comply with the petition. So the petition, on receiving the sum of 35,000 souls of gold, by this base we can't say there are folds of gold. I don't know. Right now they just want to put an FOL there, so I believe it is souls of gold. By this base, I will try and check it out, get it exact. By this base, condescension. Oh, there we go, condescension. By this base condescension, equally dishonourable to the sovereign and the nation, a stop was put to the conquest of the descendants of Clovis, and the gate of victory was for a long time shut against the French. It was once more opened, indeed, under the second race of kings, but not without a vast a fusion of blood. Clotaire was not permitted to enjoy the fruits of his rapine and injustice without the frequent interruption of fear and the restless inquietude of apprehension, the never-failing attendance of vice and usurpation. It was rumoured about this time that Childebert, the son of Thierry, lay concealed in a monastery of nuns at the city of Arles. The affrighted king no sooner heard this report than he issued orders for apprehending the abbess, whose name was Rusticula. She was accordingly brought before him and took an oath that she had never even harboured a thought of giving refuge to the object of his search. The piety of her life and the goodness of her character gave force to her declarations, and the whole court was convinced of her veracity. Clotaire, more suspicious because more deeply interested, was the only person who suspected her of dissimulation and falsehood. Rusticula. He kept her in prison till the sudden illness of his son Merovius made him believe that heaven interposed on her favour. Then, influenced by superstition, as before by fear, both arising from the same cause, he restored her to liberty. The young prince, however, died, and Queen Bertrude soon followed him. The king was greatly afflicted at his double loss. He had still 2 sons, Dagobert and Auribert. The former, though the oldest of the 2, was yet very young. He is supposed to have sprung from Haldetrude, Clotaire's first wife. The king, either from a love of repose, from policy, or from affection, ceded Austrasia to him. All right, with the title of king. Okay, so with this, the first example that occurs in the French history of a son being associated with his father in the throne. Clotaire gave him for his ministers 2 men holding in great estimation for their wisdom and their virtue, Arnauld, Bishop of Metz, and Pépin, surnamed the Old, or of London. But as prudence forbade him to despoil himself of all his authority, he reserved a kind of sovereignty over the kingdom which he ceded. Besides that, too, he kept the Ardennes, Vosges, Auvergne, and all the towns, in short, which the Austrasian monarchs had possessed on both sides the Loire. This dismemberment of the empire nearly proved, in the sequel, a source of dispute between the father and son. 626 AD, Dagobert, accompanied by all the noblemen of his court, repaired to Clichy, a royal mansion near Paris, Clichy, in order to espouse Gomatrude, sister to Sichilda and reigning queen. Sichilda, the reigning queen, The marriage was celebrated with the utmost magnificence, but the ceremony was no sooner concluded than the young monarch openly demanded restitution of all the places which had been detached from the kingdom of Austrasia. Clotaire, though extremely enraged at this ungrateful conduct, concealed his resentment, and as timid policy ever led him to entertain apprehensions of imaginary conspiracies, he was induced to believe that his son would not have dared to make such a proposal. Had he not been impelled to it by the great men of the realm. So somebody put him up to it. Influenced by this persuasion, he consented to leave the matter in question to the decision of 12 noblemen who prevailed on him to cede the Ardennes, Vosges, Rheims, Chalon, Léon, and Chambray. By this condescension, not condensation on your window, it's condescension, tranquility was, for a time, restored to the French Empire. The first interruption it experienced was from a revolt of the Gascons. The Gascons, which was, however, speedily quelled, but an insurrection of the Saxons, about the same period, wore a more serious aspect. That fierce nation, regarding the youth of Dagobert and the pacific disposition of his father as equal objects of contempt, though the opportunity favourable for the recovery of their ancient liberty. Their Duke Beatold, having previously secured the aid of several tribes of barbarians, sent a declaration to the king that he would no longer pay the accustomed tribute. On receiving this intelligence, Dagobert immediately passed the Rhine in order to chastise the rebels. He was met and attacked by the Duke before he could be joined by the army of Clotaire. The contest was maintained for some time with great obstinacy, but at length the young prince, being wounded by the stroke of a sabre, which divided his helmet and cut off some of his hair, he was obliged to retire from the field. He instantly dispatched a messenger to his father with the broken pieces of his helmet, which showed that he had performed his duty and served as unequivocal proofs of the danger he had run. My gosh, no kidding. The king lost no time in taking the field, but hastily collecting what troops he could, slew what he could. He flew to assist his son. Oh, that's a tough one because they use both here. But yeah, in this case, he flew to assist his son. He found the two armies in sight of each other and only separated by the Vézé. Bertwald, to encourage the Saxons, had spread a report in his camp that Clotaire was dead. That monarch, therefore, advanced to the bank of the river, and taking off his helmet, exposed his long grey hair to the sight of his faithless vassal, who stood on the opposite side. So here he is with the long grey hair. The Duke, insulting him, he set spurs to his he set spurs to his horse, swam the river, and being followed by a great number of his troops, immediately attacked the Saxons. Bertwald, alarmed for his safety, betook himself to flight, but was pursued by Clotaire, who, having overtaken him, cut off his head with one stroke of his sword, and struck it on a lance. Oh, here we go. A horrible carnage then ensued. The whole army was cut in pieces, and the nation almost annihilated. It was said that the ferocious conqueror ordered every one of those seditious people who was in stature taller than his sword to be massacred, and that his orders were but too well obeyed. This was the last memorable exploit of the reign of Clotaire, if indeed it may be reckoned among the achievements of that prince that this candour, which the historian should never lose sight of, compels us to remark that authors of great weight have doubted its veracity. The author of The Actions of the Kings of France, and the only writer who mentions the fact, Fredegarius, takes no notice of it. But be that as it may, Clotaire died about the same time, and in the 45th year of his age was interred at Paris in the same church, Saint-Germain-des-Prés. He had 3 wives, Haldetrude, Bertrude, and Cécilda, and left 2 sons, Dagobert and Aribert. It appears certain that he had the last by Bertrude. In vain have contemporary historians, under the influence of prejudice or of gratitude, represented this monarch as a just and gentle prince. His actions give the lie to their affections. The usurpation of Théry's throne, the massacre of Brunehaut's grandchildren, the cruel death of that princess, the murder of Bosson, and that of Godin, the son of Garnier, all prove that he had nothing in his nature of that inflexible equity and that incredible sweetness of temper which have been assigned by him. I'm going to have to go AFF. Affigued, which have been, well, I want to, okay, we'll say assigned. The N mark was missing. Yes, which have been assigned him by his panegriffs. Bosson, a young courtier distinguished by the symmetry of his form, was suspected by the king of maintaining a criminal correspondence with his queen Cécilda, and this suspicion induced Clotaire to have him assassinated. Godin had married his father's widow, and incest being declared a capital crime by the new edicts, the king, instead of bringing him to a public trial, sent some persons in whom he could confide to put him to death secretly. The young nobleman, however, being apprised of his intentions, escaped into the dominions of Dagobert, who procured his pardon, on the condition that he would never more have commerce with his stepmother. That wicked woman, whose name was Bertha, enraged at her husband's scrupulous fidelity in the observance of his promise, accused him of a conspiracy against the life of the king. Clotaire, on his accusation, the result of malice and disappointment, expressed a wish to put the fidelity of Godin to the test, and with this view he sent 2 noblemen to him, avowedly for the sole purpose of founding his disposition. But in fact they had secret orders to stab him whenever a proper opportunity should occur. Godin, suspicious of the real design, was accompanied by a number of armed men wherever he went, so he had bodyguards. He wandered from church to church, from Soissons to Saint-Denis, where he swore on the tomb of that saint, as he had before sworn on that of Saint Médard, that he would ever preserve his allegiance to Clotaire. He was proposed to him to take the same oath of fidelity at Saint Agnan, at Orleans, to which he consented. Hitherto Hitherto, hitherto, I know it looks like that, doesn't it? Hitherto, he had been constantly on his guard, but being at length taken by surprise near Chartres, he fell victim to the dissimulation, perjury and barbarity of a prince who was indebted to the intrigues of his father for the possession of a great kingdom. I know it was a winded sentence, that one. These are actions so highly repugnant to the spirit of equity, to the laws of honour, and the maxims of Christianity, as to admit of no palliation or excuse. It is a gross reflection on the humanity of the age in which they were committed, that they were neither stigmatized as unjust nor regarded as cruel. One more quick page before I end this hour. Sorry for it, it's just a long one. It cannot, however, be denied that Clotaire possessed many good qualities. He was certainly a valiant and brave prince, well versed in the art of governing, popular, affable, charitable to the poor, and a zealous protector of the ministers of religion. He had banished the Bishop of Sens for his attachment to the family of Théry, but hearing of his piety and merit, he recalled him, and inviting him to court, there begged his pardon, placed him at his own table, and loaded him with presents. He renewed the ancient vigour of the laws, and by the new regulations which he enforced, acquired a just claim to be placed in the list of legislators. To him the French were indebted for the introduction of the German Code, which was regulated and committed to paper by a parliament consisting of 33 bishops and 34 dukes, assembled by himself on his politeness and gallantry. His complaisance to the fair sex was ever carried to excess, and he was extremely attached to the pleasures of the chase. That noble diversion which Plato calls a divine exercise, and the school for martial accomplishments, has ever been the favourite amusement of the French sovereigns. From the first foundation of the monarchy, it appears from history that in early times every man had a right to shoot or hunt on his own lands, but never on those of another, without the permission of the owner. This restriction was enforced by the Roman law, which was adopted by the monarchs of France and preserved in the utmost vigour. Gontran condemned one of his chamberlains to die for having killed a buffalo in the royal forest of Vesac, or Valgain. There are some good rules laid down with regard to this diversion in the Salic law. It forbids to steal or kill a tame... Oh my gosh, I don't know what this one is. A tame stag. Okay, a deer. A stag, a male deer. That has been trained for the field. It also fixes a punishment for anyone who shall steal or kill a stag of which another is in pursuit, or who shall purloin game belonging to a sportsman, or his dogs, or his hawks. These regulations have been repeatedly confirmed and renewed by the French kings at different times. It has been pretended that the ancient monarchs of France were deficient in policy when they adopted a law that they did not pay sufficient respect to the rights of sovereignty. Be that as it may, a system of jurisprudence is now universally received in France, Spain, and Germany, which declares the primitive right of the chase to be inherent in the king, and that the nobles hold him to it. Hold it of him. Don't hold him to it. That the nobles hold it of him. That's different. Either as a saif or by concession, or by privilege. Okay, so it was interesting here. One thing for the paters out there, we have if it was a tame stag, you're not allowed to kill it. So that was one thing for the pet lovers.